Hello, and here is a study of what I describe as a wedge window kind of thing project, but the point of this one is to study up on what are known as a split primary palette. There's a lot of there's a lot of room to discuss what that is. But what we're going to be doing is talking about splitting each primary color, red, yellow, and blue, into what's called a cool version as well as a warm version. And sometimes the colors we have, the pigments line up exactly with this kind of stuff, and sometimes we need to shift things around. But right now what I'm doing is painting what looks too warm to me. But this is theoretically my straight azo yellow. And so I'm going to use the azo yellow as my sort of middle straight, not leaning either direction kind of yellow. And for the red, I'm going to use Naphthol red. And I will be building up in layers, just like I do in all my paintings and studies. This is Arch's 300-pound paper, and I think it's a little bit truer to just the possibilities of the different paints than the one we're using, the Fluid 100. So the azo yellow lines up pretty good with straight middle yellow. The Naphthol red lines up pretty well with straight middle red. Blue, on the other hand, is a different story, and that is why we are going to be using we're going to be using Peacock Blue, and this guy right here, and Ultramarine Blue, and here. And then we're gonna, when we want to get to a straight middle blue, we're actually going to mix those two together. But I wanted to just start out with no mixing and just kind of talk about how how the paints will line up with the color wheel and this idea of split primary. So this is ultramarine blue, and I'm on a kick of late, and you may have heard me talk about it in other videos, but I was trained that ultramarine blue, because it's leaning towards purple, it has a little bit of red in it. I think this is usually the common way of describing it. So it's often referred to as the warm red because it has, warm blue because it has some red in it, and red is warm. But I'm more and more calling it a cool. I'm more switching because I can. And technically it has to do with what colors appear to advance or recede in space. For me, as well as when you start getting in shadows and shading, But I'm more thinking of it as this, the peacock blue is a greenish blue, so it has some yellow in it. It's leaning towards yellow a little bit. And I feel like, I know I've seen it some places where it gets switched around, but I don't think it's very common. So I'm going to mount a campaign to try to switch the world into thinking like me. Let me know how that works out. No, and kidding aside, I sort of think of like warm Caribbean waters. And not that I've been to Caribbean waters, but I have been to Hawaii waters. And just various places where I sort of associate that color with warmer kind of temperature, and it's an interesting discussion, and I'm going to stop talking about it now. But I will refer to this as my greenish blue, and this is my, I'm going to try to refer to this as my purpley blue. Purplish, one of those. So that's sort of all the straight colors without any mixing, just sort of right out of the tube. Another one that is going to be nice and just straight out of the tube is the Hansa Yellow Light, is going to be our cool or greenish yellow. I want to make sure I have the right one there. Yeah. Ooh, different lights. So this is the Daniel Smith Hansa Yellow Light. And this is what others, and I'll accept, I do too, refer to as a cool yellow. That's because it's leaning towards green. And then to get a warm yellow, really we're going to have to start mixing something. So what I'm going to do is mix a little bit of azo yellow. It's interesting. In my particular lighting situation right now, the azo yellow, and I just compared because I have other colors, azo is seeming pretty warm to me right now, so I'm not quite sure. It's all sort of in relationship to each other. But I'm gonna grab like the smallest amount of naphthol red that's ever been grabbed. And I'm gonna, because I still want to think of this and mix that in with my azo yellow, because I still want this to read as yellow. And to not be confused with yellow orange or orangey yellow. I'm sorry, I do want it to be sort of a kind of orangey, but not so much that you could say, oh, that's clearly orangey. And you know, this stuff is sort of the reason to try to understand these principles is to really understand about how to mix colors. And what colors will tend to have what sort of effect. So there's certainly paints that straight out of the tube would be more like that warm yellow, cadmium yellow, for example, and new gamboge sometimes, depending on which pigment. So next what I'm going to do is what we're going to refer to as a warm red, and I'm going to take naphthol red, mostly naphthol red, and bring in ever so small amount of azo yellow. This is pretty watery right now. Seems too watery to me. Just a sec. bring in some of that. It wasn't even leaning towards orange there. Naphthol red, of course, being one of the highest tinting strength colors in the world. But let's try that. And once again, we're just trying to get a sense of red that's leaning towards orange. So that's working okay. And then we're going to go to a cool red. So that's what that color right there is what we would call a warm red. It's a bit redundant, because typically we think of red as warm, but then we want to understand that primary just like all the others in terms of what if we warmed it up even more or cooled it down some. So cooling it down is going to be going in the purpley direction, and that's going to be just our that was my Elmer Fudd moment. Straight Quin Rose is what I was trying to say. So think of cool red, not in terms of, or just like all these others I like to joke about, not in terms of them being really neato or boss or super awesome, but temperature wise. So it's going to, it's leaning towards pink a little bit. Pinkish and purplish. And all these things are going to be very important when we start really wanting to mix colors and make sure they don't get muddy. Mixing paints. So now I'm going to switch over and just mix up a little bit of my two blues, which is going to give me kind of the closest thing that I've come to as what I sort of think of as true blue that you can get to in watercolor paints. This stuff is not, well, a lot of it is really kind of opinion, and there's all sorts of color theory models and people who've spent a lot of time trying to clarify what everybody thinks of when they hear a certain color name. Technically, I think the more you get into it, the more you sort of realize it is relative to a color spectrum. What I don't know. But either way, that's a mix of the peacock blue and the ultramarine blue. So I'm going to let that dry and then come back and keep making things a little bit more intense and have fun with that. Okay.